Welcome to Nightmare Lullabies, where haunting tales meet soothing whispers. Close your eyes, embrace the dark, and let the story guide you into sleep. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Join us for more haunting tales to lull you into sleep. I was driving home late one night after visiting my parents for the holidays. The forecast had warned about snow, but I didn't think much of it. I'd driven in bad weather before. About an hour into the drive, the snow started coming down hard. The road disappeared under a blanket of white, and my wipers could barely keep up. I slowed down, trying to stay in the faint tracks of the car ahead of me, but eventually, even those disappeared. Then my car started to struggle. The tires spun on the slick road, and the engine sputtered. I barely managed to pull onto the shoulder before it died completely. I sat there for a minute, staring at the snow swirling around my headlights. No other cars had passed for what felt like ages. My phone had no signal, and the nearest gas station was miles back. That's when I saw the headlights. A truck was coming up behind me, its lights cutting through the storm. I jumped out and waved my arms, hoping to flag it down. To my relief, it slowed and stopped a few feet ahead of my car. The driver got out, a middle-aged man in a heavy coat and knit hat. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice muffled by the wind. I explained what had happened, and he nodded, glancing at my car. "Looks like you're not going anywhere tonight. You're lucky I came by. Hop in, and I'll take you to the next town." I hesitated for a moment. Something about him put me on edge, though I couldn't say why. Maybe it was just the situation, being stranded in the middle of nowhere with a stranger. But I didn't have much choice. "Thanks," I said, climbing into the passenger seat of his truck. The warmth of the heater was a welcome relief, but the inside of the cab felt off. It was cluttered with empty coffee cups, crumpled fast food wrappers, and a faint smell of something metallic. I tried not to think too much about it. We drove in silence for a while, the snow hammering against the windshield. I glanced at the dashboard. No radio, no GPS, just an old analog clock ticking away. "Where are you headed?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. I told him the name of the next town, hoping it wasn't too far. He nodded, but instead of reassuring me, it made my stomach tighten. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles pale. "You're lucky I came by," he said again, almost to himself this time. I managed a weak laugh. "Yeah, thanks for stopping. Not many people would in weather like this." He didn't respond. As we drove, I started to notice things. Like how the truck didn't seem to be following any familiar roads. The snow made it hard to tell for sure, but it felt like we were heading deeper into the woods, not toward the town. "Are we still on the main road?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Shortcut," he said without looking at me. That was the moment I knew I'd made a mistake. My pulse quickened as I tried to think of a way out. The storm outside was blinding, and even if I jumped out, I wouldn't make it far in the snow. "You know," I said, forcing a smile, "I think I left something important in my car. Maybe we should go back." He didn't answer. I reached for my phone, pretending to check for signal, but his eyes flicked over to me. "No use," he said. "No one's out here tonight." I gripped my phone tighter, trying to appear calm. Then, out of nowhere, he slowed the truck and pulled over. "I'll be right back," he said, opening the door. "Stay put." The moment he stepped into the storm, I grabbed the door handle and jumped out. The snow stung my face as I stumbled back toward the road, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back to see if he was following me. I just ran, praying for another car, another light, anything. After what felt like an eternity, I saw headlights in the distance. I waved my arms frantically, and the car slowed, the driver rolling down his window. "Are you okay?" he asked. I looked over my shoulder, but the truck was gone. To this day, I don't know what that man's intentions were, and I don't think I want to. All I know is that I'll never ignore a weather warning again. I'd been looking forward to spending New Year's in my family's cabin. It's small, secluded, and tucked away in the woods, perfect for a quiet getaway. I arrived just as the first flakes of snow started falling, ready to relax and enjoy the weekend. By the time night fell, the snowstorm had become a full-on blizzard. The wind howled against the windows, and the trees groaned under the weight of the snow. I didn't mind, though. I had a fire going, a warm blanket, and my favorite book. Around midnight, I decided to head to bed. The storm outside made the cabin creak, but it was comforting in a way, like the house was alive, weathering the storm with me. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized it was coming from the porch. It sounded like footsteps crunching in the snow. I froze in bed, listening. The cabin is miles from the nearest neighbor, and the road is nearly impossible to drive on in this kind of weather. No one should have been out there. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath, waiting for them to start again, but instead, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not frantic, just 3 soft knocks. I sat up, my heart racing. The knock came again. "Hello," a voice called, muffled by the storm. It was a man's voice, calm and steady. "Please, I need help." I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. There never was this far out. I got out of bed and crept toward the door. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "My car broke down," the man said. "I've been walking for hours. Please, it's freezing." I looked through the peephole, but it was too dark to see anything. Just the faint outline of someone standing there. "I'll call for help," I said. There was a long pause. "I just need to come inside," the man said finally, his voice firmer this time. Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. "I can't help you," I said louder now. The knocking stopped. For a few minutes, everything was silent except for the wind. I thought he might have left, but then I heard it. The sound of someone walking around the cabin. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the window. I didn't dare turn on the lights, afraid of drawing attention to myself. Through the snow, I saw him. He was standing by the edge of the woods, just barely visible in the beam of my flashlight. He wasn't walking away. He was just standing there, staring at the cabin. I stayed up the rest of the night, too scared to sleep. By morning, the storm had passed, and the world outside was quiet again. I looked out the window, hoping he was gone. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the snow, leading from the porch to the edge of the woods. But there was only one set, mine, from when I arrived. There was no sign of a car, no tire tracks on the road. To this day, I don't know who he was or how he got there. All I know is that I've never been back to that cabin, and I don't think I ever will. It was a quiet night, and the snowstorm had been raging for hours. I'm a part-time taxi driver, and I'd planned to head home early because of the weather, but the app buzzed with a ride request just before I was about to log off. The pickup location was out of the way, but it was my last fare, so I decided to take it. Money's money, right? The roads were nearly empty, the snow muffling everything. It was so dark that my headlights barely cut through the falling snow. When I pulled up to the location, a small clearing near the woods, there was no one there. I waited, thinking maybe they were late. I even honked the horn, but no one came. Just as I was about to cancel the ride, the back door opened, and someone got in. It was a man, bundled in a heavy coat and scarf. I could barely see his face under the hood. "Where to?" I asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. He didn't respond. I tried again, louder this time. "Where do you need to go?" He raised his hand and pointed straight ahead, toward the empty road. At this point, I was already on edge. The storm, the strange pickup spot, it was all off. But I told myself it was just my imagination and started driving. The silence in the car was unnerving. He didn't say a word, not even when I asked for clarification about the destination. Every so often, I glanced in the mirror. He was just sitting there, staring straight ahead. His hood cast a shadow over his face, and his hands were folded neatly in his lap. The drive felt like it was taking forever. The snow was getting worse, and I had no idea where we were heading. After about 20 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you don't tell me where we're going, I'll have to end the ride." Finally, he moved. He leaned forward slightly, his face still obscured, and pointed again, this time to a small, unlit road veering off into the woods. "I'm not going down there," I said firmly. For the first time, he spoke. His voice was low and hoarse, like he hadn't used it in a long time. "Just keep driving." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I slammed on the brakes and turned to face him. "Look, you need to get out," I said. But the back seat was empty. My heart stopped. The door hadn't opened. I hadn't heard anything. He was just gone. I sat there in shock for what felt like minutes, staring at the empty seat. Finally, I reached over and unlocked the doors, pushing them open to check outside. The snow was falling heavily, and there were no footprints leading away from the car. No sign that anyone had been there at all. I didn't stick around to figure it out. I slammed the door shut and drove straight home, not even bothering to log out of the app. The next day, I checked the ride history. The request was still there, but the profile was blank. No name, no photo, no rating. Just an address for a drop-off point I'll never forget. I haven't driven at night since. I'm an avid hiker, and my friend Sarah is just as outdoorsy as I am. We've done countless trails together, but this one still haunts me. It was late December, and we wanted one last hike before the year ended. The snowstorm wasn't supposed to hit until later that evening, so we thought we had plenty of time to make it to the summit and back. The trail started out easy enough. It was cold, sure, but the snow was fresh and powdery, and we were making good time. But as we climbed higher, the wind picked up, and the flakes started falling faster. By the time we realized the storm had arrived early, it was too late to turn back. The snow was coming down hard, and the trail markers were completely buried. "We should head back," Sarah said, her voice barely audible over the wind. I nodded, but as we tried to retrace our steps, it became clear we were lost. The snow had erased our tracks, and everything looked the same, just endless white. We wandered for what felt like hours, the wind biting at our faces. My phone had no signal, and Sarah's battery had died. The fear was setting in, but we didn't want to panic. Then we saw it, a narrow trail barely visible through the storm, winding its way through the trees. It didn't look like the main path, but it was something. "Let's follow it," I said, my voice shaky. Sarah hesitated. "Are you sure? What if it doesn't lead anywhere?" "It's better than staying here," I said. We started down the trail, the snow crunching under our boots. The trees closed in around us, and the wind seemed to quiet a little. It felt almost safe, but then Sarah stopped abruptly. "Do you hear that?" she asked, turning to look at me. I shook my head, but then I heard it too, a faint crunching sound like footsteps behind us. We both turned, but there was no one there. Just the storm and the empty trail. "It's probably just the wind," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. We kept walking, faster this time. The sound of footsteps seemed to follow us, stopping every time we did. "This isn't right," Sarah said, her voice trembling. I wanted to reassure her, but I couldn't. The trail was growing narrower, and the trees seemed darker, almost menacing. Then we saw it, a small wooden signpost buried in the snow. It was old, the paint faded, but we could just make out the words. "Trail closed." My stomach dropped. Why hadn't we seen any signs earlier? "We need to go back," Sarah said, grabbing my arm. But when we turned around, the trail behind us was gone, completely buried under fresh snow. Panic set in. We started running, trying to find our way back, but the storm seemed to swallow everything. The footsteps were louder now, and no matter how fast we moved, they stayed right behind us. Finally, we broke through the trees and stumbled into a clearing. In the distance, we saw the glow of a cabin's light. Relief flooded over me. "We're saved!" I shouted. We sprinted toward the light, our feet slipping on the ice. When we reached the cabin, I banged on the door, desperate for someone to answer. The door creaked open, but the cabin was empty. The light was coming from an old oil lamp sitting on a wooden table. "This doesn't feel right," Sarah whispered. She was right. The cabin looked like it hadn't been used in years. The walls were covered in frost, and the furniture was coated in a thick layer of dust. Then we saw them. Boot prints in the snow leading up to the cabin, but not away from it. We didn't stay to figure out who, or what, had been following us. We grabbed the lamp and used its light to find our way back to the main trail. By some miracle, we made it out of the storm and back to the parking lot, where our car was buried under a layer of snow. To this day, I don't know who left those footprints or why that trail was closed. But I've never hiked in the snow again, and I never will. It was the night after Christmas, and I was driving home from a friend's cabin in the mountains. The snowstorm had hit earlier than expected, turning the highway into a treacherous mess. I wasn't far from home, maybe an hour or so, but the snow made every mile feel like an eternity. The visibility was awful, and my car struggled to grip the icy road. Somewhere along the way, I noticed a car ahead of me, its taillights faint through the storm. I decided to follow it, figuring they knew the road better than I did. We drove like that for a while, the two of us crawling along the highway. It was comforting, in a way, not to feel so alone out there. But then something changed. The car in front started slowing down, its taillights flashing as it came to a stop. I pulled up behind it, wondering if they were in trouble. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, bundled in a thick coat and hat, and he waved at me to roll down my window. I hesitated for a moment, but cracked it just enough to hear him over the wind. "Roads blocked ahead. he said, his voice muffled by the storm. You'll have to turn around. Blocked? I asked. How far? Not far. Looks like a tree came down. It's not safe to keep going. Something about his tone felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was just the storm playing tricks on me. Thanks, I said, rolling up the window. I watched as he walked back to his car, got in, and turned around, heading back the way we'd come. I sat there for a moment, debating whether to follow him. But then I thought, if the road was blocked, why hadn't I seen anything on the traffic app earlier? And why didn't he mention trying to call for help? Curiosity got the better of me. I decided to drive a little further, just to see for myself. The snow was thicker now, and the road was barely visible, but I kept going. A few minutes later, my headlights caught something. A tree lying across the road. The man was telling the truth. The road really was blocked. But then I noticed something else. There were no tire tracks in the snow leading up to the tree. I sat there, staring at the fallen tree and the pristine snow around it. If the man had been ahead of me, there should have been tracks. But there weren't any, just the undisturbed blanket of white. A chill ran down my spine. I quickly put the car in reverse and turned around, my heart racing. As I drove back the way I'd come, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man's car following me. But the road behind me was empty. I didn't see another car for the rest of the drive home. The next day, I checked the news, looking for any mention of a fallen tree or road closure. There was nothing. No reports of blocked highways, no accidents, nothing. I still don't know who that man was, or how his car disappeared without leaving tracks. But now, every time I see taillights on a snowy road, I hesitate before following them. It was supposed to be a simple road trip, just me and my partner, Jake, heading upstate for New Year's. The weather forecast warned of snow, but we didn't think much of it. We'd grown up in snowy winters, and it wasn't our first time driving in less than ideal conditions. But this storm was different. By nightfall, the snow was coming down so heavily that we could barely see the road. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up, and the tires were slipping on the ice. We need to stop, I told Jake, gripping the door handle as the car skidded slightly. He nodded, his jaw tight. I'll look for somewhere to pull over. After what felt like hours of crawling along the highway, we saw it, a small, dimly lit hotel sign glowing through the storm. The building was old, with peeling paint and a sagging porch, but it was better than being stuck in the car all night. Inside, the lobby was eerily quiet. The air smelled faintly of mildew, and the single light above the reception desk flickered every few seconds. An older man appeared from the back, his face lined with deep wrinkles. He gave us a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Need a room? He asked. Yes, please, Jake said. Just for the night. The man handed us a key without asking for ID or payment, which struck me as odd, but I didn't say anything. I just wanted to get warm and sleep. Our room was on the second floor, at the very end of a long hallway. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, and the carpet was threadbare in places. When we got to the room, I hesitated before opening the door. Something about the place felt wrong, but I chalked it up to exhaustion and followed Jake inside. The room was simple. 2 twin beds, a small dresser, and a single window overlooking the snowy parking lot. The heater rattled loudly, but barely gave off any warmth. We settled in, trying to make the best of it. Jake fell asleep almost immediately, but I couldn't. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, and the shadows in the room felt like they were closing in. Around 3 a.m., I heard it, a faint tapping sound like knuckles against glass. I froze, my eyes darting to the window. It was pitch black outside, the snow whipping past in a frenzy. The tapping came again. Jake, I whispered, shaking his shoulder. He groaned but didn't wake up. I sat there, staring at the window, too scared to move. Then I saw it, something brushing against the glass. At first, I thought it was a tree branch, but there were no trees near the building. The shape was wrong, too thin, too angular. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Finally, I worked up the courage to move. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shone it toward the window. There was nothing there. The tapping stopped. I let out a shaky breath and lay back down, telling myself it was just the wind. But then I heard it again, this time coming from the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Jake, I whispered again, louder now. This time he stirred. What is it? Someone's at the door, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He got up, grumbling, and walked to the door. I stayed frozen in bed, my heart pounding. Jake looked through the peephole, then turned to me, his face pale. "There's no one there," he said. "We didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, we packed up and left without even checking out." The lobby was empty, and the old man from the night before was nowhere to be seen. As we drove away, I glanced back at the building. The sign was off, and the windows were dark. It looked abandoned, like no one had stayed there in years. Jake tried to laugh it off, saying the storm must have messed with our heads. But I know what I heard, and I'll never forget the sound of those knocks in the middle of the night. Driving late at night has always been a peaceful thing for me. The quiet, the rhythm of the tires on the road. It's calming. Or at least it used to be. Last winter, during a massive snowstorm, I was driving home from visiting my parents. The highways were slick, so I stuck to the back roads where I could take it slow. It was around midnight, and the snow was falling so heavily that my high beams barely made a difference. The world outside was a blur of white, and the only sound was the hum of the heater and the occasional crunch of snow under my tires. About an hour into the drive, I noticed something strange. There was a car behind me, its headlights bright against the storm. I hadn't seen it pull up, and it was odd to see anyone else on this road so late at night. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then the car got closer, too close. Its headlights filled my rearview mirror, and I could feel the pressure of it, like the driver was trying to push me faster. "What's your problem?" I muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. The road was narrow and winding, and there was no way I was speeding up in this weather. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to ignore the car behind me, but then it disappeared. One moment, the headlights were glaring in my mirror. The next, they were gone, swallowed by the storm. I glanced over my shoulder, but the road behind me was empty. No skid marks, no sign of a car sliding off the road, nothing. I felt a chill run down my spine, and it wasn't from the cold. I shook it off, telling myself the car must have turned onto a side road. But the unease stayed with me, settling in the pit of my stomach. About 10 minutes later, I saw it again. The headlights were back, closer this time, almost blinding. "What the hell?" I said, my voice shaky. I slowed down, hoping they'd pass me, but they didn't. They stayed right behind me, matching my speed. I was about to pull over and let them pass when the car behind me swerved sharply to the left. I braced myself, expecting to hear the screech of tires or the crunch of metal. But there was nothing. I looked in the mirror again, and the car was gone. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. The snow was falling harder now, and I could barely see past the hood of my car. I sat there, staring into the storm, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Then I felt it. A presence. It's hard to explain, but it felt like someone was in the car with me. The air was heavy, the kind of heaviness that makes your skin crawl. I glanced at the passenger seat. Empty. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I froze. There was someone sitting in the back seat. I couldn't make out their face, just the outline of a figure, dark against the dim interior. I didn't think. I just acted. I flung open the door and jumped out into the snow, my heart pounding in my chest. The car idled on the side of the road, its headlights cutting through the storm. I stood there, shivering, staring at the back seat through the frosted windows. It was empty. I got back in the car, locked the doors, and drove the rest of the way home without stopping. I didn't look in the mirror again. To this day, I don't know what I saw or thought I saw. But now, whenever I drive at night, I keep the rearview mirror tilted down. Just in case. It was the dead of winter, and the snowstorm had hit harder than anyone expected. The main roads were barely passable, so I decided to take the back roads home. A risky move, sure, but I figured I'd have the place to myself and avoid any traffic jams. The snow was relentless, piling up faster than the plows could clear it. My tires crunched through the fresh powder, the headlights illuminating the endless stretch of white ahead of me. That's when I saw it. A snowplow up ahead, its orange lights flashing through the storm. I felt a wave of relief. Following a plow was perfect. It would clear the road for me, and I wouldn't have to worry about getting stuck. I kept a safe distance, watching as the plow pushed mountains of snow to the side. The driver seemed meticulous, taking their time to clear every inch of the narrow road. But as I followed, something started to feel off. The plow wasn't leaving tire tracks. At first, I thought the snow was just falling too fast, covering them up. But the longer I drove, the clearer it became. The road behind the plow was pristine, untouched. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just the weather playing tricks on me. But then the plow stopped. It didn't pull to the side or slow down gradually. It just stopped in the middle of the road, its orange lights still flashing. I hit the brakes, skidding slightly as my car came to a halt behind it. I waited, expecting the driver to get out or wave me around. But nothing happened. The plow just sat there idling. After a few minutes, I honked my horn. The sound was muffled by the storm, but it should have been loud enough for the driver to hear. Still no reaction. I turned off my car and stepped out, the freezing wind cutting through my coat. The snow was knee-deep, and the cold bit at my face as I trudged toward the plow. "Hey!" I called, waving. "Is everything okay?" No response. I walked closer, the orange lights casting eerie shadows on the snow. When I reached the driver's side door, I hesitated. The window was fogged up, but I could see a shape inside, someone sitting in the driver's seat. I knocked on the window, the sound sharp against the howling wind. The figure didn't move. A knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I tried the door handle, but it was locked. "Hey!" I shouted, banging on the door now. "Are you all right?" The figure shifted slightly, and for a moment, I thought they were going to open the door. But then they just sat there, still and silent. I stepped back, my breath clouding the air. That's when I noticed something else. There were no footprints around the plow. No tracks where the plow had come to a stop. No sign of the driver getting in or out. Just a smooth blanket of snow, untouched except for my own footprints. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back toward my car. As I climbed in and locked the doors, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The plow was gone. The road ahead was empty, the flashing orange lights replaced by the soft glow of falling snow. I don't know where it went or how it disappeared without a sound. But now, whenever I see a plow in the middle of a snowstorm, I think twice before following it. It was the middle of a brutal snowstorm when I found myself running low on gas. I had been driving for hours, and the main highway was getting more treacherous by the minute. There were no other cars around, and the snow was so thick I could barely see the road ahead. As I turned down a smaller road, I noticed the faint glow of a gas station sign in the distance. At first, I thought I was imagining it. There shouldn't have been anything out here. But as I got closer, I saw it more clearly. A small, rundown gas station, its lights flickering weakly through the blizzard. I pulled into the station, my tires crunching against the snow-covered pavement. The place looked old, like it had been abandoned for years, but the lights were on, and the pumps were still standing. I thought maybe it had recently been reopened. I got out of the car, the cold biting into my skin. The wind howled around me, and I hurried to the pump, hoping to fill up before the storm worsened. But as I reached for the nozzle, I noticed something odd. The pumps weren't working. The digital display on the side was cracked, and the numbers were frozen on an empty readout. The nozzle itself was stuck in place, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. I walked around the station, trying to find someone inside, but the door was locked. The windows were covered in snow and grime, and I couldn't see anything through them. That's when I noticed the strange sound, the low hum of the building, like something was running inside. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I tried the door handle, and to my surprise, it opened. The interior was dark, save for a dim light in the corner. I stepped inside, shaking off the snow. The air was cold, stale, and smelled faintly of something old and decayed. The counter was empty, and there were shelves filled with dusty, forgotten products. "Hello," I called out, but there was no response. I was about to leave when I heard it, the sound of footsteps from the back of the building. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, as if someone was taking their time to walk toward me. But no one appeared. The footsteps stopped just behind the corner. I held my breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. But then nothing. I turned to leave, but as I did, the lights flickered, and the air grew even colder. I glanced back at the shelves, and that's when I saw it. Someone standing at the back of the store, just out of sight. I couldn't make out any details, but I could feel them watching me. The figure didn't move. I bolted for the door, and as I stepped outside, the storm had intensified even more. I glanced back one last time, and the lights of the station went out completely, leaving me in the pitch-black night. I never went back to that station, and I've driven that road a dozen times since. Every time I pass by, I look for it, but it's never there. The sign is gone, the pumps are gone, and the lot is just a stretch of snow-covered ground. I still don't know who or what was in that station with me, but I have a feeling it was never meant to be found.